A silver tray crashed to the stone floor. Wine sprayed across the white linen and a dozen polished boots. A hand grabbed her hair and yanked her head back before she could even rise. The whole banquet hall went silent. Somewhere under the long table, a dog growled, low and broken, the sound of an animal too old to fight but still too loyal to run. The woman holding the wine pitcher did not cry out. She had learned long ago that crying only ever made it worse. Her name was Liesel, and tonight she was the help at her own sister's engagement feast. At the very head of the table sat the guest of honor, a pale man who had not spoken a single word all evening. Then he stood. Why did the vampire king rise from his chair for a servant girl? Stay with me on this one. Now, to understand what happened in that hall, you have to understand the girl on the floor. Liesel Vance had lived in Castle Ravenscroft her whole life, and for most of it she had not been a servant. She had been a daughter. Her father owned the castle and the valley around it, the frozen river and the black pines that climbed the mountains on every side. When her mother died, Liesel was 7. When her father remarried, she was 9. And when her father died, 3 winters before this night, she became nothing at all. His new wife had brought a daughter of her own, Marguerite, a girl with gold hair and a smile that could charm a bishop and a tongue that could cut a throat. The 2 girls were the same age, near enough, but that is where the sameness ended. After the funeral, Liesel's stepmother gathered the household and made a simple announcement. The late master, she said, had left debts. Liesel would earn her keep like everyone else. There would be no more lessons, no more fine dresses, no more place at the table. Nobody argued. That is the part that still stings even now. The cook said nothing. The steward said nothing. They had all eaten her father's bread for years, and not one of them said a word for his only blood daughter. They simply handed her a bucket and looked away. Believe me, a child learns fast who will protect her and who will not. By the end of that first week, Liesel knew the answer was nobody. Almost nobody. There was the dog. A great gray wolfhound named Bryn, half-blind in one eye, with a graying muzzle and joints that ached in the cold. He had been her father's hunting dog once. After the funeral, the new mistress wanted him put down. Too old, she said. Too useless. But Bryn would not leave Liesel's side, not for food, not for anything. And in the end it was easier to let the old dog follow the servant girl than to drag him out to the snow. So they let him live. He slept at the foot of her cot in the cold cellar room they gave her. He walked the halls behind her while she scrubbed. When the kitchen boys threw scraps at her head for sport, the dog put himself between her and them, growling that low, broken growl, and the boys backed off. He was old and slow and could barely see. He was also the only living thing in that castle who loved her, and she knew it. 3 years passed like that. 3 years of frozen mornings and aching hands. Liesel grew tall and quiet. She learned to move through the castle like a ghost, to be seen only when she was wanted and never when she was not. And she might have lived her whole life that way, invisible, if her stepmother had not arranged the grandest match in the history of the valley. Marguerite was to be engaged, and not to some local lord with a muddy estate. No. The man coming to Ravenscroft was a name spoken only in whispers, a name that made old men cross themselves. He held lands no map could measure. He had outlived kings. They said he never aged, never ate at table, never walked in daylight. They called him Aldrich Mortha, the vampire king. Most people thought he was a legend, a story to frighten children. But the letter had come, sealed in black wax, and the letter was real. He was coming to consider Marguerite for his bride. And the night he arrived, the whole valley would see how high the house of Ravenscroft had climbed. What nobody in that castle understood was simple. The most powerful creature alive was not coming for the golden daughter at all. He was coming for the girl with the bucket. And the moment he took her hand, every cruel year was going to come collapsing down on the people who built it. Here is how it started to unravel. The feast was set for the longest night of winter. For 2 weeks the castle scrubbed and baked and polished. They hauled in pheasant and venison, oranges carried over the mountains at terrible cost, candles by the hundred. Marguerite was fitted for a gown of deep red silk that cost more than the cook earned in 10 years. And Liesel, of course, worked through all of it. She hauled water until her shoulders burned. She beat the dust from tapestries no one had touched in years. She did it with her head down and her mouth shut, because that was the only way to survive in that house. The night before the feast, her stepmother came down to the cellar. She did not come often. She stood in the doorway with a lamp, looking at Liesel the way you might look at a stain on a good coat. "Tomorrow you will serve at the high table," she said. "You will pour the wine, you will keep your eyes down, you will not speak. And that animal," she pointed at Brynn, curled by the cot, "stays in the cellar. If it shows its face in my hall, I will have it killed in front of you. Do you understand me?" Liesel understood. She always understood. She nodded and her stepmother left, satisfied, taking the light with her. But here is the thing about old dogs. They do not understand orders. They understand love. And the next night when Liesel slipped up the cellar stairs in the plain gray dress they had given her, Brynn rose on his stiff legs and followed her into the dark. She begged him to stay. She pushed him gently back toward the cot. He simply waited until her back was turned and came on anyway, silent as smoke. And by the time she reached the great hall, it was too late to send him back without being seen. So she hid him the only place she could. Under the long high table, behind the heavy fall of the cloth, pressed against her ankles where the shadows were thick. And she prayed nobody would notice. The hall that night was something to behold. 100 candles, silver on every surface. Lords and ladies from across the valley in their finest, all of them craning to see the legend at the head of the table. And he did not disappoint the eye, that pale man. He sat very still, very tall, dressed all in black with no jewels at all, which somehow made him grander than every glittering guest in the room. He did not eat, he did not drink. He watched the company with dark, patient eyes, and when Marguerite laughed too loudly at her own jokes, those eyes did not laugh with her. Liesel moved along the table with her pitcher filling cups, keeping her eyes down just as she had been told. She was good at being invisible. She had practiced for 3 years. And she had almost made it the whole length of that long table when one of Marguerite's cousins, a fat young man already drunk on her father's wine, stuck out his boot. She did not fall, not quite. But the tray she carried tipped, and a silver dish slid off and struck the stone floor with a crash that split the room in half. Wine sprayed. Heads turned. And before she could even kneel to gather it, her stepmother was on her feet, and a servant near the door had her by the hair, yanking her head back to make an example of her in front of the whole shining crowd. "Clumsy little fool," her stepmother hissed, loud enough for the lords to hear. "Forgive her, my honored guests. The girl is simple. She is barely worth the bread we waste on her." The hall laughed, soft, cruel laughter, the kind that costs the laughers nothing. Marguerite laughed loudest of all, her red silk shaking, her gold head thrown back in delight. This was her night, and the humiliation of her sister was just one more sweet course in it. Under the table, Brynn growled. Low. Broken. Liesel pressed her ankle against him hard, a silent plea. "Not now, not now, please." If they found him, they would kill him, and she would lose the last thing she had. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She made herself small. She dropped to her knees on the wet stone and began to gather the broken silver with bleeding fingers, and she swallowed every feeling she had, and she waited for it to be over the way it always, always was. And the hall, satisfied, began to turn back to its food and its gossip. The cousins smirked. The stepmother sat. The danger passed. It was, by every law of that house, finished. Just another night that the girl in gray would survive by disappearing. That should have been the end of it. except the pale man at the head of the table had not turned away. He had not laughed. He had not moved at all, except that his eyes had found the girl on the floor and stayed there. And in the noise of the recovering feast, very quietly, he set down a goblet he had not once lifted to his lips all evening. The small sound of silver touching wood. That was all. But the man nearest him heard it and stopped talking, and then the man beside that one stopped too, and like a wave going backward the silence rolled down the table until the whole hall felt it and did not know why. Aldrich Mortha stood, a chair scraped, 100 faces turned. And the most powerful creature any of them would ever lay eyes on stepped down from the high seat, walked the length of the table past every lord and lady who had laughed, and stopped in front of the servant girl bleeding on the floor. Nobody breathed. He went down on one knee. The vampire king in his black coat, on the wet stone, level with the help. He reached out and took her trembling hand, the one full of broken silver, and he opened her fingers gently and let the pieces fall, and then he lifted her to her feet as you would lift a queen. "You are not simple," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of that frozen room. "And you are not theirs to shame." Liesel could not speak. She had forgotten how to be spoken to like a person. She stood there shaking, her ruined hand inside his cold one, and stared at him. And then it got worse for everyone else in that room. Because under the table, where the cloth hung low, the old wolfhound came creeping out into the candlelight, stiff and gray and growling no longer. Bryn walked straight to the pale man and pressed his great head against the stranger's leg, the way he had once pressed it against Liesel's father, and the dog who hated every soul in that castle looked up at the vampire king with his one good eye and wagged his tail. "If you are still with me, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button right now, because what Aldrich Mortha said next is the reason he crossed 300 miles of mountain in the dead of winter, and it turns this whole night inside out." Marguerite was the first to recover her voice. She rose from her seat in her red silk, that lovely smile fixed on her face though it had gone tight at the edges. "My lord," she said sweetly, "you mistake yourself. That is only a servant. I am the lady you came to see. Come, sit, let me pour for you myself." Aldrich did not so much as glance at her. He kept his eyes on Liesel, and he asked her one question, low and gentle, as if the 100 people watching did not exist. "What was your father's name?" "Tomas," she whispered, "Tomas Vance." Something moved across the pale man's face. Not surprise, recognition, the look of a man who has searched a long time and finally found the thing he searched for. "Tomas Vance," he repeated softly. "I knew it the moment I saw the dog. That hound was a pup the last time I rode through this valley. Your father raised him." He turned then at last and looked at the whole gilded room, and when he spoke his voice was no longer gentle. 40 years ago, in a winter worse than this one, my carriage broke an axle in the pass above this castle. The storm would have killed me. The cold is one of the few things that still can. And every door in this valley was barred against the stranger in black. Every door but one. A young man named Tomas Vance opened his gate to me. He did not know what I was. He warmed me at his own fire, fed my horses, asked no questions, and at dawn he sent me on my way. I told him that night that I owed him a debt and that one day I would come to repay it. He laughed and said he wanted nothing. Aldrich's dark eyes swept the table. "I have outlived empires. I do not forget a kindness, and I do not forgive a cruelty. I came back to honor my word to Tomas Vance, and I find his only daughter on her knees bleeding, while his roof shelters the people who put her there." The silence in that hall was a living thing now. The stepmother had gone white as the snow outside. Marguerite's smile had finally cracked and fallen off her face entirely. "My lord," the stepmother began. There has been some misunderstanding. The girl is troubled. She invents stories. Did she invent the bucket? Aldrich asked. Did she invent these hands? He lifted Liesel's torn fingers so the candlelight caught them. Did she invent 3 years of your boot on her father's child? I have walked your hall all evening, madam. Servants talk when they think the dead cannot hear, and I am very good at being thought dead. I know what you took. I know what you are. He let Liesel's hand down softly. Here is what is going to happen. And this is the part. This is where the night truly turned. This castle, Aldrich said, this valley, the river and the pines and every stone of Ravenscroft belonged to Thomas Vance. By every law of man, an older law than man, it passes to his blood, not to his widow, not to her daughter, to his daughter. He looked at Liesel. To you. Marguerite found her voice and it came out shrill. You cannot do that. The papers, the will, everything is in my mother's name. It is ours. It is legal. You have no right. I have every right. Aldrich did not raise his voice, and somehow that was worse. I am the lord this valley swore to before your grandmother was born. The papers your mother forged the week Thomas died, yes, I know of those too, they burned tonight. He nodded toward the great fireplace, and one of his own men, who had stood so still by the door that no one had marked him, stepped forward with a strong-box under his arm. The stepmother's strong-box, the one from her locked chamber. My people arrived 3 days before I did, Aldrich said mildly. You really should keep a closer count of your servants, madam. Some of them were mine. The stepmother lunged for the box. 2 of the pale man's men caught her by the arms. She screamed then, all her fine manners gone, screaming that this was robbery, that they would all hang, that the girl was a liar and a thief. And the lords who had laughed at Liesel an hour before now looked at the floor and edged toward the doors, wanting no part of whatever this was. But Marguerite did something worse than scream. Marguerite went quiet. She crossed the hall in her red silk, slow and cold, and she stopped close to Liesel and spoke in a voice only the 2 sisters and the king could hear. Whatever he gives you, she whispered, I will take it back. You will turn around one morning and there will be a fire or a fall or a sickness no doctor can name. I have done it before. How do you think your father's chest gave out so young and so sudden? It was meant to break Liesel. Instead, it was the worst mistake Marguerite ever made, because Aldrich Mortha had ears that could hear a heartbeat across a room, and he heard every word. He turned to her very slowly. Say that again, he said. Marguerite paled, but pride held her chin up. I said nothing, my lord. You said you poisoned Thomas Vance. His voice had dropped to something that made the candle flames lean. You stood in this hall and confessed it to his daughter, thinking yourself too clever to be caught. Child, I have hunted men across centuries for less. Now here is where you might expect blood. A monster, a confession, a hall full of people who deserved a fright, and the old stories would have given you that. But Aldrich Mortha was older than the old stories, and he understood something they did not. The cruelest thing you can do to people like Marguerite and her mother is not to kill them. It is to take everything and let them live. I will not harm you, he said, and the whole room sagged with relief, and then he kept speaking and the relief curdled. I am going to do something far more lasting. By dawn, every soul in this valley will know what you did. The forged will, the poisoned cup, the years of cruelty to your lord's own child. I will see it written and read in every village from here to the sea. You will keep your lives, you will keep nothing else. No name, no coin, no roof, no welcome at any door, because every door will have heard the tale of the family that murdered Thomas Vance and enslaved his daughter. You wanted the whole valley to see you tonight. A thin, cold smile. They will. For the rest of your days, they will. Marguerite's legs gave way, and she sat down hard on the wet stone where Liesel had knelt an hour before. The wheel had come all the way around. Then Aldrich turned his back on the both of them as if they had ceased to matter, which, to him, they had. He faced Liesel, and the hardness left his face. "You are the lady of Ravenscroft now," he said gently. "These walls are yours. These people answer to you. No one will ever again raise a hand to you under this roof, or anywhere I hold sway, and I hold sway a great deal further than this valley." He paused. "I made your father a promise of one favor, but I find I do not wish to leave it at one. If you will have it, you have a friend in me for as long as you live. And whatever you choose to do with these people who wronged you, I will stand behind it. The judgment is yours. It was always meant to be yours." And that, more than the castle, more than the gold, was the thing that undid her. Not power handed to her, choice handed to her. For 3 years no one had asked Liesel Vance what she wanted. She looked around the hall at her stepmother held between 2 guards, at Marguerite broken on the floor, at the cook and the steward and the kitchen boys who had thrown scraps at her head, all of them now waiting in terror to hear what the servant girl would decree. She had every right to ruin them. The vampire king himself had handed her the knife. She knelt down instead, not to serve, to gather the old dog into her arms, Bryn, half-blind and faithful, who had pressed himself against her leg through the whole of it. She buried her face in his gray fur for a moment, and when she lifted her head, her voice was steady for the first time in 3 years. "Put my stepmother and my sister out at the gate," she said. "Tonight, with a cloak each and bread and not one thing more. They will not be harmed and they will not be followed, but they will never sleep under this roof again." She looked at Marguerite. "You told me how my father died. I will carry that the rest of my life, and so will you. That is punishment enough. Go." It was mercy, but it was not weakness. There is a difference, and everyone in that hall felt it. The guards lifted the screaming stepmother and the silent daughter and carried them out into the longest night of winter, out past the gate, into the snow, with a cloak and a loaf and the whole valley waiting in the morning to learn what they were. The great doors boomed shut behind them, and the hall that had laughed at Liesel an hour before stood frozen, every lord and servant of them, waiting to see what the girl with the bucket would do with the rest of them. She did the thing that proved she was truly her father's daughter. She forgave them, not because they deserved it, because she had decided, somewhere in those 3 years on her knees, that she would not become the thing that had broken her. She told the cook she could stay if she could learn loyalty. She told the kitchen boys they would muck the stables until spring and think about the scraps they had thrown. She told the steward to open the cellar room, the cold one where she had slept, and never let another soul be put there again. And one by one, the people who had looked away when a child was handed a bucket bowed their heads to her, and meant it, because fear and shame together make a powerful kind of respect. Aldrich Mortha watched all of it from the side of the hall, and on his ancient face was something close to wonder. The winter passed, and here is the part the old stories never tell you, because they are too busy with blood and fangs to bother with what comes after. Liesel Vance became the Lady of Ravenscroft in truth. She was not a natural ruler at first. She had spent 3 years being invisible, and it took time to learn how to be seen, how to give an order without flinching, how to sit at the head of the long table instead of crawling beneath it. But she had a quality the valley had not seen in a lord since her father died. She had been the lowest person in the castle, so she knew exactly what the lowest person needed. She opened the granaries in the hard months. She took in orphans the way someone had once failed to take in her. The valley, which had crossed itself at the name of Ravenscroft for 3 winters, began to bless it instead. The vampire king did not stay. That was never his way, and Liesel never asked him to. But he came back. Twice a year, when the dark was longest, his black carriage would climb the pass and the great doors would open for him, and he and the lady of the castle would sit by the fire long into the night and talk of her father, of debts paid and kindnesses remembered, of the strange thread that ties one good act across 40 years to its reward. He never once frightened her. A creature that had outlived empires, and the only place he was ever known to laugh was at the fireside of Thomas Vance's daughter. Some said in the villages that it was a love story, the lady and the king. Maybe it was, in a fashion, but not the kind you are thinking. It was the love of two people who had each been alone a very long time, and who had each, against all sense, decided to be kind anyway. Sometimes that is the deepest bond there is. As for the old dog, Bryn lived 2 more winters, warm by the great fire, fed from the high table by a hand that had once been forbidden to touch it. When he finally went in his sleep on the longest night of the year, Liesel buried him herself in the frozen ground beside her father, and she did not let the servants do it for her. She had learned that the things that love you when you have nothing are the things you carry forever. And the stepmother and Marguerite, they lived. Aldrich kept his word on both ends of it. They were never harmed, and they never knew peace. The tale went out across the valley exactly as he promised, the forged will and the poisoned cup, and there was no door from the mountains to the sea that would open to them. They became 2 beggars on a long, cold road, telling anyone who would listen that they had once been the ladies of a great castle, and no one ever believed them, because who would believe such a thing of 2 women in rags? That was the whole of their punishment. To have had everything, lost it in a single night, and to be remembered only as the women who wronged Thomas Vance's gentle daughter. Now think back to where we started. A silver tray on the stone, a hand in a girl's hair, a whole bright room laughing at someone who had no one in the world but a half-blind dog under the table. That is how the night began. The lowest person in the castle, kneeling in spilled wine, swallowing it all because that was the only way she knew how to survive. And it ended with that same girl standing at the head of the hall, the lady of everything, choosing mercy when she could have chosen ruin. The tray that crashed to the floor was the sound of one life ending and another beginning, though no one in that room could have known it, least of all her. The thing worth remembering is the smallest thing in the whole story. Thomas Vance opened one door on one cold night for one stranger and asked for nothing. He was dead and buried before that kindness ever came home. He never saw it pay, but it paid. It crossed 40 years and 300 miles of mountain to lift his only child up off the floor and set her where she belonged. So the next time you think a small kindness disappears into the dark and is forgotten, remember the girl with the bucket and the king in the black coat. Some debts are never lost. They only wait. And when they come back like a winter king through the snow to settle everything, all at once, in front of the whole gilded room. Thank you for staying with me to the end of this one. If it moved you even a little, leave a single word in the comments, and I will see you in the next story.